Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com and also the great radio station WFOV 92.1. And we're very glad to have you with us as our guests as we host a program called What's Going On. And we come on at 2 o'clock from 2 to 3 on Mondays, and we air again on WFOV at 12 o'clock on Saturdays. And we are very glad that you have taken up your time to share that hour with us, and we try to respect your time and hope you will stay tuned for what will be a very good program. I have to start off and tell you that we have lost this republic. You know, in the foundation moments of the country, a lady asked Benjamin Franklin, "What are you all doing in there?" As they were meeting in Philadelphia for a little less than 3 months, and she wanted to know, what is all this secrecy about, and what are you doing in that room, and what are you coming up with, having been charged to go to Philadelphia to revise the Articles of Confederation, which has so weakened the federal government that it could not respond to national crises. They were trying to amend it so that it could fix some of the problems that had come up. And certainly after the Shays' Rebellion of 1786, they were trying to find a way to respond to the crisis that occurred in Massachusetts, a rebellion, Shays' Rebellion. And they wanted to respond to what was now an obvious flaw in the Articles of Confederation. And they wanted to fix it without at the same time doing what the Articles were designed to do, which was to limit the authority of the central power, which they were fearful of, because they were aware that centralized power that's not decentralized, is very dangerous to the liberties of the people. So the charge was how to undo the Articles of Confederation's weaknesses, at the same time not to so strengthen the government, put it in its place that it would in fact go out of control, and how to merit the restrictions to the power of government so that it can actually function as a deterrent to not having domestic tranquility. And you will recall that in the preamble it said that we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So they were in there, really they came to the conclusion that they could not revise the Articles and do that which they had been sent to Philadelphia to do. And what they decided to do was go beyond their mandate, and they drew up a whole different document. That's why they had the secrecy in that room, because they knew that unless they could get before the American public, before it seeped out that they had actually overthrown the Articles and would put another document in its place, they knew that they had no chance of getting it agreed upon, because people were very askance of government, and they were aware that they had fought against centralized power as far as the Articles of Confederation, trying to correct the centralized powers of George III in Great Britain. They were trying to come behind the Articles, therefore, that it so weakened the federal government they could not respond to national crises. And they realized that they could not just tell the people, we're going to just throw the document out, because that was not their mandate. That's not why they'd been sent to Philadelphia. So they had to pretty much hide their intention behind those closed doors. And as they closed those doors, they understood the gravity of the problem. The problems that the Articles could not give the federal government the authority to squash rebellion without the government therefore taking over liberties and going out of control, because once you give government power, then it's hard to get the power back that government is in fact bequeathed to itself. So that's the catch-22 they were dealing with in that room. And this lady asked Benjamin Franklin, "What are y'all doing? What is that secrecy about? What are you doing in that room that nobody knows what's taking place?" And there's no news coming out of the room about what is taking place as far as your charge going to Philadelphia. And Franklin answered and said, a republic if you can keep it. And that was a charge placed upon the American people. We are creating a republic, Article 1, Section 4. We are creating a republic if you can keep the republic, meaning that the American people have to be the custodians of their own liberty once it's been invoked through drawing up the document that came out to be the Constitution of the United States. And when they ratified in 1788, the intention was to create a republic, one in which the people's representatives, acting upon the voice of the people, would in fact take the voice of the people and represent it in the nation's capital. A republic means that you have the people's voice being heard in the parliament, and the people are the decision makers through the representatives. You see that in terms of what I said last week, in terms of the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence written by the great Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, who wrote that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these, meaning among these inalienable rights, are the right to your life, right to your liberty, and the right to pursue happiness, meaning without the interference of government. Then it says, to secure these rights, the rights that you have based upon your birth, your inalienable rights, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just authority from the consent of the governed. So then those who governments govern, they get their just powers from the consent of those whom they are governing. And that therefore means that any time that they are not getting the consent of the people, then the authority is not just. Because the people must decide for themselves what laws and what restrictions they want to place upon their own liberty, and no one on the outside of the people's will should make that decision. And I make that statement only because of what is happening in this country right now, and I can tell you that this republic has been lost. It does not mean that it cannot be recaptured, but right now this republic has been lost to the morons, the culprits, the criminals, the authoritarians, the totalitarians that we have running the American government. This government has been captured. This country has been captured. And nothing shows it more than this discussion they were putting in the media, placing in the media, almost to the non-rising. I mean, I think the American people must be numbed. We must be numbed in this country. They put before the American people last weekend a conversation that went on in the FBI by Lisa Page and Peter Strzok. And Lisa Page has sent an email to her lover in the FBI, Peter Strzok. They were having an affair. And she asked a question that Donald Trump cannot be president. There's no chance for him to be president, right? Right? She asked it twice in the communication, meaning that this was emphatic. It wasn't so much a question as it was you're throwing it out there so as to call upon the forces that she was aware that were operational inside of the FBI. And we'll talk about those forces later on. Those forces inside the FBI, she's really asking implicitly if that apparatus is going to be invoked to bring about the result that is desired by those who are in the leadership of the FBI, not by the rank and file. the leadership. The rank and file of the FBI would do its job. It doesn't have the capacity to make the decisions. They are out there as foot soldiers. We're not talking about them. And when you have them talking about how good a job most of the person are doing and how the rank and file are doing their job and all of that, that's a misdirection. We're not talking about that element of the FBI. We're talking about the leaders. We're talking about James Comey, and we're talking about the leaders of these other organizations. We're talking about McCabe, the fired assistant director of the FBI. We're talking about the ones in these other organizations. We're talking about Brennan, and we're talking about Clapper. Every last one of these persons is a criminal. And those are the persons running this government, and this is why this government has been captured by the criminal element. I'm not making this up. I'm telling you what has already been researched. And I bring these books to the studio because I know a lot of people don't have the time to do the research on what is really going on. And I bring these books to the studio only to show you that this is a documented source that we're using here at the studio. We're not making it up. We don't have to make it up. It's well documented, and one of the best books where it's documented is a book written by Thomas DeLorenzo called Organized Crime. And I keep quoting this book because I want to keep it before the public to show the public, those in the public, that there's documentation for the fact that when we talk about organized crime, you can talk about it as it relates to the mafia, but organized crime is also gangsters in government. And Michelle Malkin has documented it. Peter Schweiker, in his the number of books he's written, Peter Schweiker has a number of books out. One of the books he has is The Architects of Ruin. Very good book. Another book that he wrote documents this. Where he tells American people, throw them all out. And you might think that, well, the Democrats, but not the Republicans, or the Republicans, not the Democrats. What Peter Schweiker is talking about is throw them all out. Because these people that you have in government have set up a very sophisticated system where they have a crime syndicate. It's not a swamp. It's a crime syndicate. And you saw it last weekend in operation with the IG report, the Inspector General's report. What you can keep watching, all this misdirection, but keep watching. The litmus test is whether or not any of these gangsters go to jail. all this misdirection you're looking at right now through people like Christopher Wray, the new FBI director that took the place of James Comey. What they do these musical chairs. They change the faces of the rulers. They don't change the policies. And Christopher Wray got up there and took the IG report that was put out by Mike Horowitz. And the report did the same thing that James Comey did when they claimed to have been investigating Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton was supposedly being investigated because of the 32,000 emails that have been placed on a private server. In other words, espionage, but not espionage as it was done during the time you had the Rosenbergs. You remember Ethel Rosenberg and Julius Rosenberg in their espionage, where they actually took paper of certain blueprints of the nuclear weapons and the Manhattan Project and passed them to the Russians, to which they were in fact, paid. They don't do espionage that way anymore, where you actually have a transference of paper. What Hillary Clinton did was put national security information on the public server and had anyone that could hack into it, knew how to hack into it, will have access to it, but her fingerprint is not in passing it off. This was nothing other than an espionage operation. And if you want to know how that is in fact seen by law, the law, it doesn't matter if you put national security information in your possession and have it in the public domain. The law doesn't care whether it is a fraudulent, slippage or not, whether it's fraudulent intended or not. The law punishes because the damage is still done to national security, whether it was intended or not. And one example of the punishment that accrues from that is what happened to a man that was on a naval ship, and he just simply took some pictures of the submarine that was on the naval ship he was on, and he was just doing that. So we have a record of he worked here, he did this, and this was the job that he performed. He was, in fact, wanting, to have a souvenir monument of his service to his country. And when he was found to have had those pictures in his possession, he was, in fact, incarcerated, because that is still a violation. Although they didn't have any malevolent intent, it still was a violation of the law, and therefore the law came down very hard on him, and he was put in jail, incarcerated for 8 years? I forget the number of years he was incarcerated for, but that was a penalty of law. That was a violation of law, and the penalty was certain because it is a violation, although he didn't intend anything as far as to harm the nation. But this was not the case with Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton was actually doing money laundering. This reward for the payment to the Clinton Foundation. You can't, sometimes you don't, you can't take money directly. You have to have some way in which the money can be justified through a money laundering situation. And what they did was set up the Clinton Foundation, which, by the way, today is defunct, because you can't run an operation if you don't have any power. Why would they want to give money to a foundation if they can't influence policy? And while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, she could influence policy, and therefore this putting the secrets on the national server, keep in mind this person is sworn not to share these secrets. In fact, only so many people can have access. I mean, it has on the national security information, it has on there, C, confidential. 32,000 emails placed on the public server. And James Comey acted like he was going to take an action against Hillary Clinton for what was obviously a malfeasance in office. And he went and itemized all of the things that had been done. And I was listening to it. I thought, wow, they're going to actually take this woman down. This was a obvious violation of the law. It's going to be prosecuted. We are definitely going to have accountability. Got to the end of the 15-minute press conference, got to the end of it and said that she was, the law says, grossly negligent. So Peter Strzok had told Comey to use the language that she was extremely careless. Now, somebody can tell me what the difference is between extremely careless and grossly negligent, and why those terms were used rather than terms as found in the legal mandate. By changing the wording, although the meaning is not different, changing the wording, it looks like the violation falls less than under the color of law. The law requires, for conviction and for really incarceration, gross negligence. Well, extremely careless means what? Same thing.
See, I don't understand the gross negligence part. She deliberately had a server installed in her house. That's not negligent, that's deliberate. I don't understand how they can say that's negligent. I mean, you actively sought out IT help to install a personal server. I don't understand how that can be considered. If you or I to take away, if we were working at a bank or working at some other institution, we had oversight or we had access to kind of things like that, and we installed a server and put that stuff on there in our own homes, they would certainly raise red flags over that, and they would certainly put up a conviction against us on that. And I don't understand how she escaped that, other than maybe Comey didn't want to be suicided again,
John, you're making a very good point, and it goes above what I was saying. I was trying to show what the law would have required, but you're right. It's even more extreme than that. This is not gross negligence, although gross negligence is enough of a legal problem that would have brought about, if there had been anyone else other than those inside of the inner circle of government, it would have brought about what happened to this gentleman on that Navy vessel that was incarcerated for just taking pictures. But the pictures are a violation. You cannot do that.
Okay, I'll tell you what. Here's the thing: is they say oversight or negligence. She has several people we paid for to help her out, especially when she was enrolled. The Secretary of State. So she can't say negligence because somebody had to have oversight on that anyway. So why didn't they go after them? If you and I or anybody else who has a busy life, and my life's not as busy as everybody else's, but if we didn't do the IRS stuff that we required each year of us, they'd come after us. They would put fines and penalties on us on that level. And if they could try to find some other deeper, what they call deeper, more sinister thing to it, they would throw our butts in prison. So, I mean, it's ridiculous to say negligence. See, he just basically is terrified of facing the Clinton machine. That's all Comey was. He was terrified of him.
Your point about it being deliberate makes it even more extreme as a violation of the law, because this was a deliberate act on Hillary Clinton's part to give the national security secrets to, quote unquote, the Russians. And we've got to ask a question here. There was a uranium deal made with Russia. We saw 500, I forget was it 500,000 or was it, I forget how much money it was, but it was more than $500,000 that was given to the Clinton Foundation by Russia. Ask yourself the question of, given the fact that we have on the record collusion between Hillary Clinton and the DNC in Russia, why are we investigating the political campaign of Donald J. Trump? Why are we dealing with this misdirection, and why is it being tolerated by the members of the House of Representatives and the members of the Senate, and why no one has sat down and ended this witch hunt, and that's what it is, a witch hunt, by Robert Mueller? Why is that allowed to go forward when it's very clear, based on the IG report, which didn't go far enough? I mean, the IG report did the same thing that Comey did. Comey showed the malfeasance, and then he exonerated Hillary Clinton in the end after showing that this was a violation of the law and all of that. Then he said at the end that no prosecutor would go forward with making the case because it was not enough evidence after showing us all the evidence that showed the crime. Then he pulled back from anything that would brought about accountability because the crime was violated.
I'd like to know this too. They claim that
the law was violated.
They claim Trump gave information before he was president to Russians, and he was colluding with the Russians. I'd like to know this. I'm not saying it's a possibility. Okay, we'll just play the devil's advocate here. Say they have the correct premise on that part. I'd like to know how Trump, Donald Trump, as a regular person, as a multi-billionaire, but supposed to be a general member of the public, how would he have access to all this in the first place? That would right there, if they could say that he had access to that kind of information that was state secrets or whatever, how was he given information like that would be useful for the Russians in the first place? So I'd like to know, that would all show that something seriously detrimental, seriously wrong with the way the system was functioning already.
John, the people have an enemy, and the people's enemy is that which they set up to protect their liberties. Go back to what I said earlier at the very beginning of the program about the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. The governments are established among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. This government is not carrying out the ends for which it was set up. Therefore, the government is what Thomas DeLorenzo says, because it does not, in fact, get its just, getting its just, its rights to act. It acts in the name of the people. That's how he gets his just authority. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. that to secure these rights, governments are instituted, meaning they're set up. Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just authority from the consent of the government, of the governed. Any other authority, therefore, that they are exercising in their own name is power that's unjustly used. Okay, we're going to take a break right now from WFOV. Hopefully have you back in 4 minutes, and we'll be waiting for you to come back at that time. We'll continue what we're doing here at allpointstv.com, and we're going to show a few more documents here about how we've actually lost. We have, I don't mean to say that we've lost forever in terms of we cannot reclaim that which belongs to the people, which is their government, but our government no longer belongs to the American people in this country.
Well, we got the best government money can buy. And it's, if you got enough money, that's what I've always told people. Go to a guy who's got a fledgling idea that they want to be a politician, get him right out of the nest and say, look, we're going to buy you. We're going to pool our resources and prop you up. You're going to do our bidding. Because let's face it, it'd be more honest than have this BS that we're going on right now, that we actually have a real legitimate choice or choices. We know who are being offered up now. They're not. We're not being really offered up. I mean, Trump was the anomaly. I mean, and let's face it, he's still well established, well heeled. He was part of the establishment for business and stuff in New York and New Jersey area and the rest of the East Coast. So, I mean, let's face it, I don't really think he anticipated him winning. I really don't. I think it was a total fluke. He was definitely a third-party candidate. His own party still hates him, and they show no cohesion. They show no backbone. They show no resilience. They want to roll along with the Democrats and screw the American people over. And so I don't see how, I just don't see how we can actually say we actually have a choice. We really don't. We're spoon-fed everything. And let's face it, Comey doing what he did shows that they totally disregard the established laws anyway, if it's for them. Everybody else has to be held under the minutia of it. So, I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, John and I don't agree on that point about Donald Trump did not intend to win. That's what they were saying on the that's what some of the critics were saying prior to the election. He doesn't intend to win. He's just running for show, and he's a narcissist, so he just wants to be in front of the public and get in front of the cameras. Donald Trump was doing 4 and 5, sometimes 6 rallies a day, and they told him, some of the ones that were watching his campaign doing better than what they thought, they were saying, well, you've already gotten a victory because of the fact that you have become the nominee of the Republican Party. And he said that if all of this comes to naught and that he doesn't end up with the presidency, he said that he would consider this to be both a waste of resources, meaning his own finances, because he pretty much financed his own campaign, that he would consider this a waste of resources and also waste of his time. Donald Trump, in fact, when the voting first came in early, what they did, the press, to give the impression that Hillary was doing better than she was doing, Hillary Clinton was doing better than what she was doing, they showed all the states in which Hillary Clinton was winning. And there was a conversation going on between Donald Trump and Ivanka, and he was saying, how am I losing, given his rallies and how many persons were showing up at his rallies, and what we were saying in terms of rallies of Hillary Clinton? How is this possible? Well, the press was framing the election, but by 10 o'clock, with polls closing at 8, by 10 o'clock, some of the states that should have been in Hillary Clinton's camp, based upon what they had done in the past in previous elections, that wasn't happening. And then eyebrows were being raised because when Wisconsin came in, that was a statement. North Dakota came in. Ohio came in. Florida. When those states started coming in, something was going on here that was not supposed to be taking place. And by 11 o'clock, it was very clear we had a new player on the national horizon. And I had predicted that Donald Trump was going to win. Quite frankly, I wrote it on Facebook. I just simply saw the numbers. I'm glad you're back from WFOV. We're still pretty much where we were when you left 4 minutes ago. Glad you came back to the discussion. We're still talking about the fact that we have lost control of our government. and we're going to have to face the music here. We cannot continue to put our heads in the sand and act like we don't know what's going on, that we don't recognize that these people in power are basically gangsters.
Well, hold up there. You have a copy of the Constitutional Bill of Rights right there on the table, right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, hold that up for the audience that can see it. Okay, it's a rather thin volume, really thin. It's really like, what, 30 pages maybe?
Yeah, if you would fold them over, if you fold the papers over, you have let's say an 8.5 by 11 by 17.
Okay, now
if you fold those pages over, you could fold it over and get all the Constitution on those, what amounts to 14 pages on one side, 14 pages on the other side, and you'd have the whole Constitution written out. It doesn't take a lot to write out laws, and when they write things like they did this IG report, John had it on more than 550 pages. Because they don't intend for anybody to read it.
Well, look at the healthcare bill. I mean, John Conyers. It was like mocking people when they asked, "Well, did you read it?" "Oh, did I read it? It's 1,000 pages." That's your job. Matter of fact, you're supposed to be a lawmaker. You guys are supposed to be the ones writing that stuff up. Who wrote that up for you guys?
Right. And they're not writing any of it up. But they have deep state players they've appointed to do their bidding behind the scenes. You know it, and I know it.
That's what the point I was trying to make. To have you hold up that book, the Constitution. Yeah. I was like, that's supposed to be how the government can do against us. But look at all the volumes they have. That's how we're supposed to contain the government, constrain it.
If you can write John, you're making an excellent point here again. If you can write all of the laws of the nation, the government laws, the Constitution of the United States can be written in this volume, then what are these 2,000 pages of Obamacare reports? What is that about? What's the 550 some odd pages, more than that, really about 560 pages of the IG report? What is that about? They're embedding the cover-up in all of these pages of technical language and so on and so forth, hoping nobody will read it. Most person will not read it. And they are just simply doing misdirection. They don't intend anybody to read these things. People don't even read this, and this is not that much to read. I memorized most of it.
Well, I can actually safely say I've actually seen you quote chapter and verse of that without being present.
Because it was the frame was intended. See, they had an honest intent. They intended for the American people to know what the constitutional laws and restraints were upon government, because they knew they could not keep it. That's what Benjamin Franklin's talking about. They knew they could not keep the republic if the people were not vigilant in terms of holding government accountable. What are you doing in that room, the lady asked. And Franklin answered, we are creating a republic if you can keep it. Because they knew that every generation has to be asking of its own liberty, otherwise government will take it. Government is a liberty-taking institution. That's what governments do. I will also tell you this. I don't know if anybody will verify and back me up on this, because it's such an extreme view. But my conclusion, after going back, I've been reading a lot of ancient history and just trying to see how it worked in that time period and how much has changed in the present time. I would contend, and I'm using Egypt as a model of this, I would contend today that we have a one world government, but we have it compartmentalized into governments on each of the territorial spaces, the boundaries of each of the countries. In other words, we have the politicians singly in control of the planet.
Well, if you want to go conspiracy thing, and there's proof on this, so it's in fact, it's like all the presidents of the United States, I think all the presidents, or 44 of them, whatever, actually were connected to royal families of England and other countries in Europe. Even including, some way, tenuously, I guess, even Barack Obama. So, I mean, through some lineage, so, I mean, they're the same family. I mean, Bush has certainly got ties in with, these past royal family members and stuff. Reagan had some, I guess, they did genealogical research. So, I mean, all these people, is it just happenstance, or, or is it just because we have a very limited gene pool, or what?
That's underneath that's underneath the basic problem. Ayn Rand is a little closer to it. In fact, I think Ayn Rand hits it with a sledgehammer, the nail on the head with a sledgehammer. It's a kind of people. You see, it could be this family and that family. We can talk about it on that level there. That's kind of underneath the radar of what really we're dealing with. We're dealing with the kind of people that are ones that pursue power. That's what the problem is. It takes a certain man a certain kind of psychological disorder. Let me say it a little bit different. Anyone that is pursuing power, I don't care what they're promising. I don't care what they're saying. I don't care what their words are. The very fact that they are in pursuit of power to therefore be able to inject themselves into sovereignty, into the sovereignty space of those who have inalienable rights. The mere fact that they would pursue power to be able to invoke themselves in between the powers that you're born with and the rule of government, that right there is a psychological disorder. What you really want, what ethically would be, what ethics would require, is that each person would be in pursuit of his own ethics, so that he or she does not want to ethically interfere with the sovereignty of anyone else, because they don't want anyone interfering with their sovereignty. That they want to be respected for the human beings they are and the rights that they are born with, and they want to also allow others to then enjoy the rights in which they are, that are inalienable rights that they are in fact endowed with. Everybody endowed with rights, everybody ethically therefore respecting their own rights and the rights of the other individuals as well. You even have that in the Judeo-Christian code. Do unto others what you would have them do unto you. And so in the ethical domain, you want to be sovereign, and you would respect, therefore, the sovereignty of others. And your security, your sovereign security, is in people being sovereign and then respecting the sovereignty of others. Go read Ayn Rand's book, The New Intellectuals. Read the first chapter of that book, where Ayn Rand goes into that. But she also talks about those who are antithetical to it. And she calls them two different groups. There are two different groups, and they're still operative right now. Attila and the witch doctor. Those are the two villains. And they are villains wherever they're found. And that's what the framers understood. You have to understand something here. When they were in that room trying to fix the problem, which they tried to fix it really with the Articles of Confederation in 1781. They tried to fix it then by simply not giving the federal government any power to do anything. And that was fine for 5 years. But in 1786, they had a national, well, it was a national crisis, but it really was in one of the states. The Shays Rebellion, a tax rebellion, by the way, where Daniel Shays rose up against the government in Massachusetts, and it was Massachusetts' problem because the federal government could not do anything to come to rescue of Massachusetts, and they recognized, the other 12 states recognized that's a problem for them also, because what if they rise up in their states? What happens then? And so now that they're trying, now that they understand that they have so weakened the federal government they cannot respond, they got to fix that problem. And they came together in Philadelphia trying, first of all, to amend it. But they found out they were so flawed in that respect, to the point that the anemic government could not respond to anything. Didn't have any purse strings, first of all. Didn't give them any money to do anything. And had the federal law only able to be amended by all of the states agreeing to therefore amend the Articles of Confederation. You just can't function with unanimity. So they came to fix it, but they tried in fixing it, knowing the danger that they were trying to stop with the Articles. They tried to fix it by then dispersing the power. Not in terms of the federal government not having any power, but to divide it so that in each of its corridors, the power will be in each of the domains, and then have them being able to check on each other by separating the powers and having checks and balances in it.
I'm going to play a devil's advocate here, okay? Because I've been in arguments before similar to what you're talking about. And the person will say, like, the Articles of Confederation, if you try to show that you had any kind of appreciation for the intent and stuff like that, you have these people now who will say that, well, the country, as it got larger, couldn't have functioned underneath that kind of, apparatus, that couldn't, underneath those kind of documents on the Articles of Confederation. Okay. And they said because simply the fact that you couldn't have us, right, it would take too long in case of national emergency to raise up an army. And there's some valid points to that. But then again, if I really think that if there was a real physical threat to the safety and security of the people of the United States, the government would have came together fast enough to actually, bring about a response effective enough. I just look at what we've done since the 1900s, to that time Woodrow Wilson's era, and all we have been engaging in, and our people can argue with me in this, but I'm pretty much set. Both World War I, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam were largely. None of those things were actually a direct threat to the sovereignty of the United States. Now, the World War II could be argued Nazis or the Japanese could eventually been that threat. But at that point, they weren't. So basically, we've been fighting other people's wars for, you alluded to it last week. We were a nation of 240 years old, and we've been in a war 220 some years of it. And it was only intermittent periods where we actually had relative peace. And another thing is because of the Woodrow Wilson era, before him, the Teddy Roosevelt, his expansionistic ideas, and we became an empire instead of a republic. And Patrick Buchanan wrote a book about that. We've expanded. We've always done that. So some people say that, getting back to my original question, is how would you think that a country this large, with that complex, say, economy and all these factions within it, do you think we could have continued to function with something like the Articles of Confederation?
No, we couldn't. Don't forget the Articles of Confederation, John, was one in which there were 13 countries. There was no United States. The United States was each state was a country unto itself. It had its own, laws, and they had to find they didn't recognize that they had put themselves in harm's way because Massachusetts' problem was Massachusetts' problem. Virginia couldn't respond to it. What were they going to do? Organize a militia and then send that militia over to Massachusetts? What if they did that? And then what happens to Virginia? Then they are, in fact, open their doors up to rebellion inside their state. So then they said, they were saying in the beginning of writing the Declaration of Independence, well, not the Declaration of Independence in this case here, but in terms of writing the preamble to the Constitution, they said they first of all wanted to say we the states, because the states are the ones that have to create the federal government. But they changed the wording we the states to we the people. But originally it would have been we the states of the United States in order to form a more perfect union. Because the states are now recognizing the common danger that they were under by not having a united front. So now we're talking about we, the people of the, listen to this part here, we the people of the United States. See, the states are now uniting and therefore bequeathing to the federal government, which they are creating, by the way. They are creating the federal government. And how is the federal government being created? By them coming together as the United States and therefore bequeathing some of its sovereignty to the central government, bequeathing the power, some of the power they're delegating it to it, and giving them limited powers to do this, this, and this. Why? In order to promote the general welfare and to ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense. You see what they're doing here? And promote the general welfare. That's what government's responsibilities are. And it doesn't take a lot of power to do that. That's why what they were doing there in Article 1, Section 8, they actually delegated the powers that they were in fact allowing to be accrued to the federal government. They were actually saying that the federal government will have these powers enumerated from the embodiment of the states to the federal government, and they are in fact allowing only so many of their own rights, their own sovereignty, out of their own statehood to go to the federal government, and they are bequeathing the federal government this itemization of the powers that they are relinquishing from the states to the federal government. Only those rights, though, that would in fact allow the federal government to promote the general welfare and secure the blessings of liberty that Thomas Jefferson wrote about in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. It's very consistent. They were very much aware that they could lose this republic. And that's why Franklin answered as he did. We're creating a republic here, but he knew the danger of it. Why? All republics have been taken over by their governments. Once government gets its authority to act in the people's name, it doesn't always act in the people's name once it gets the idea that it can act. The people are put to the side at a certain point, and they begin just to act outside their name, and they were aware of that. So when that happened, let's say that the president goes out of control. Okay, the president goes out of control. In Article 2, Section 4, there's a remedy for the Congress to bring the president into heel. Article 2, Section 4.
Another thing is too, I've had some people say that our founders over-idealized the democracies of Greece and Rome, and I don't think they over-idealized them at all. I mean, I think they saw them as warning, saw what happened there as cautionary tales, and because they read Suetonius, they read all these other people who talked about the dirtiness, the just corruption that crept in, easily crept in. So I mean, I don't think they over-idealized the democracies or whatever, the attempts at a democracy or republics before this one. I mean, this is, and that's another thing is too, I keep on hearing this is a democracy, and I just want to scream bloody murder. It's a republic. It's a republic. There's a vast difference. There's quite a bit of difference.
Intended to be a republic, never intended to be a democracy. Democracy is dangerous to liberty. In fact, it would be a contradiction of what Jefferson wrote in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, because a democracy means that the majority, it really means majoritarian tyranny, and where the majority voice doesn't have to respect the minority voice, simply get a majority and they can be tyrannical through, got more person doing one in this than they have the other, and you have a tyrannical government acting against the will of the people whose voice is outnumbered by this many people going in that direction, which may be contrary to the liberty of the people. No, you want a Republican form of government. You want a government where the people's voice is through their representatives, and the representatives can only speak unless they're speaking in the voice of the American people. Raise your hand if you think we have that in place right now, certainly in the nation's capital. We have law. We have to be honest here. Until somebody goes to jail, what we see happening in this country, by the way, Peter Strzok is still working in the FBI. How does that happen? This man was saying to his lover, Lisa Page, she was saying, Donald Trump can't be elected president, can he? Why? First of all, why is she asking that question to Peter Strzok, who is a single vote? Why is that question being asked? Donald Trump cannot be president, right? Right? And the answer is, listen to his answer to what he wrote in return. He wrote no. No. Because we will stop him. And we need to have Peter Strzok brought before the Congressional Committee and ask who is that we he was talking about. But we already know the we he's talking about. He's talking about the intelligence community.
I'd like to know this. If I'd like that points out glaringly right there that we don't have a government that reflects our interests, because you got those people immersed in that culture in D.C. They're like groomed by them. They're chosen by them. They're groomed by the existing culture. It's basically like a yeast thing. They bring it in and they put their leavening in it, and that person just grows along with them. There's no challenges. There's no actually counterbalances, and we're supposed to have a government of checks and balances. And it's just when if you actually looked at the onset, the creation of the FBI in the first place, I don't know why anybody who was a constitutionally minded person would allow that or didn't object to that. Because right then, even from the onset, with somebody like Hoover wasn't the first one. He was like the second or third director of it, but he was the one that guided it through. If you look at his personal agenda and the way he got away with it for so many years, there's no way in H that anybody can tell me that wasn't always weaponized. The FBI was not there to investigate crimes.
John, I brought some books to the studio just in case we got into that issue of how long has this been going on. We have the FBI is a secret police force in this country, and I did bring two books to the studio, since we are pretty much a black radio station, but we are not saying we're only speaking to blacks. We are WFOV was founded by the visionary Paul Herring, and it is set up to serve pretty much in the black community, but its listenership is for everybody. The point I'm making about the FBI and using the FBI's background as far as this relationship to blacks, I wanted to show how it's been illicitly engaging in that same regard as it relates to black people. This book right here I'm holding up is called Malcolm X, the FBI File. And you go through this book and read about what they were doing. And we know, well, you wouldn't be surprised they would be keeping tabs on Malcolm X and creating problems between Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad and stirring that pot. Although the friction between the two men was going on, I'm not saying that would not have been the ultimate result if they had not done this. I'm just simply saying they were injecting themselves into that dispute, and they then widened it and then played a role in some of the things that occurred through which Malcolm X was assassinated. Not that they had to stir that pot in order to bring that result about. That was going to happen anyway because of things that were going on inside of the Nation of Islam. Pillars of Fire, you can read that book and see what that is about. But the FBI was operating, the point I'm making here is that the FBI was working overtime, and they were in fact involved in that dispute and were doing things that were outside of the strictures of law. We're not surprised they would do that in Malcolm X's case. But I brought this book. This is about Martin Luther King. This book is written by David Garreau, and it's called The FBI and Martin Luther King Jr. Let me read page 125 of this book, just a letter that King received in 1963. You know, that was the same year now of the March on Washington, which King gave his "I Have a Dream" speech. And although everybody's clapping and applauding it today, when King gave that speech, August 28, 1963, Sullivan, who was the second person in charge inside of the FBI, and Hoover's lover, DeLoach. Go read about that, about Hoover. That's another thing about these psychopaths in power. They're also sexually deviants. They marked that speech that King gave on that date and said, "We must mark now, if we have not done before, Dr. King as most dangerous person in America." And what he was talking about a vision of having blacks and whites together. They don't want that. In fact, what they're doing is making sure that never happens. I mean, people think that the problem is really whites and then blacks, and they're fighting each other and all of that. The problem is the government is keeping people divided in this country. And I notice that everybody talks about whites, they never say white Democrats. They never say whites in the Democratic Party or in the power structure of the Democratic Party, because that's where the problem was. But here's what was done on page 125. Here's what was done by the FBI when King was getting ready to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. You know, he got the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964 because that March on Washington brought a lot of national attention and also international acclaim to Dr. King, that was talking about binding up the nation's wounds. Lincoln talked about it, but the ones actually trying to bring that about was King, trying to bind up the nation's wounds, saying, I have a dream that's deeply embedded in the American dream. He said deeply rooted in the American dream. And he was really mimicking the words of Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, and King mentions those words. We hold these truths to be self-evident. He mentioned those words in his speech. And after he got through speaking, they were not long in meeting in Washington and saying we must mark King now, as we have not done before, as the most dangerous person in America, because they do not support that vision. That vision is dangerous to the ruling class in this country. You think they want to see this country united? Because if they are united and not dealing with all this nonsense down here where we are on this horizontal level, then we really can look up and see what's happening as the puppeteers are in fact manipulating the public. But here's what they wrote to King. Here's what was written to King. King, in view of your low grade, I will not dignify your name with either a Mr. or a Reverend or a Doctor. And your last name calls to mind only the type of king, such as King Henry VIII. King, look into your heart. You know you are a complete fraud and a great liability to all of us Negroes. White people in this country have enough frauds of their own, but I am sure they don't have one at this time that is anywhere near your equal. You are no clergyman, and you know it. I repeat, you are a colossal fraud and an evil, vicious one at that. You could not believe in God. Clearly, you don't believe in any personal moral principles. King, like all frauds, your end is approaching. You could have been our greatest leader, and it goes on like that. And eventually, they tell King, you know what to do. And they tell him that you only have so many days to do it, meaning before he gets the Nobel Peace Prize. Many have read this letter and take it as a letter telling King to commit suicide. I don't read it exactly that way. I think it was something else, that the implicit message was step down from the movement and so on, and step down from the SCLC. But anyway, this was written as if it's written by a fellow person that was black. It's written by the FBI. So this is not something that just started with this particular incident. The leadership of the FBI has always been doing this. This is a secret police force. The FISA court is another aspect of that. We've got to get control of our government, people. That's the bottom line. And right now, we don't have control of our government, and the republic for which it stands does not stand anymore in this country. Let's get busy and understand what we're dealing with. Pay attention, and let's demand that our government respect the will of the American people embodied in our constitutional laws. Okay, we got to get out of here. Until next time, I want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.